"I'm okay," said Sherlock. "Really?" "You're not okay," came the reply. "Is that so? And what gives you the authority to say that?" Sherlock asked, turning squarely to face his friend. "I'm a medical doctor," Dr. Watson replied. Right. I keep forgetting that," Sherlock conceded, looking out across the cloudy moorland. Watson made a brief courtesy smile. "But really," Sherlock went on, "you may be a medical doctor, but you're like a late 1800s medical doctor. Doctors washing their hands between patients just became a thing." "Still, you need your rest," Watson insisted. Sherlock stroked his chin in thought. "I need to solve cases, feel intellectually superior, and stay up for 70 hours straight, stopping only for brief zingers against anyone not as smart as me, which is everyone, and for cocaine breaks. Speaking of which, Doctor, might you have—" "No," said Dr. Watson. Yes, Sherlock Holmes occasionally did cocaine. And no, it wasn't illegal until after World War I in Great Britain. Also, don't do drugs. "All right, let's go for a walk or something," Sherlock suggested, and took a long puff on his pipe. Because there's nothing quite as healthy as a heavy breakfast, followed by two men shutting themselves up inside a small cottage, bursting at the seams with pipe smoke. Just then, they heard a knock at the door. Dr. Watson cocked his head to the side. They were out of London, far in the west of England, to allow Sherlock some much-needed rest, so he didn't die from constant work. So, who could it be way out here? Watson stood and answered the door, but one look at the two men waiting on the other side told him all he needed to know. He had seen their look at least 1,000 times back on Baker Street. The look of someone in need of help, of someone with nowhere else to turn. Watson didn't need to ask why they had come. He knew that they had a mystery. I'm Jason Weiser. From Bardic, this is Fictional. With a sigh, he explained quietly to the vicar and the other gentleman that Sherlock was here to rest and couldn't be disturbed on account of his health. From the inner room, however, Sherlock guessed by Watson's hesitation what the situation was about and hollered impatiently for the visitors to come in. Without hesitation, the two gentlemen pushed their way inside, brushing past Watson, who nearly fell backwards against the open door before following on their heels. Still seated, Sherlock worked his observation magic and guessed that the vicar of the nearby parish, Mr. Roundhay, had only heard of whatever incident had the pair so agitated, secondhand, from Mr. Tregennis, the other gentleman, so Mr. Tregennis should just get on with it. The vicar started talking anyway. Last night, Tregennis had been playing cards with his two brothers and his sister, Brenda, at their house just at the moor. He left them at 10 p.m. and made to walk back to town, but early this morning, as he was walking back to his siblings' house, he was overtaken by Dr. Richards in a carriage, who had been sent on an urgent call to his house. Naturally, the doctor stopped and explained all of this to Tregennis, before allowing Tregennis to ride along back to his brother's house. When he made it to the house, he found his two brothers and his sister, still at the table exactly where he had left them, but in a very different state. His brothers were laughing and singing, carrying on with pained looks across their faces. The candles on the table burned low, having been lit all night. Brenda sat slumped over, in the same chair as the night before, and at first, they had thought she was still asleep, until they tried to wake her. She lolled backwards, revealing eyes wide open, her face contorted into a pained expression. She was dead. Upon the reveal, the brothers took one look, laughed, and continued singing and dancing. They had obviously gone insane. "How far away is this house?" Sherlock asked. "Sherlock, a murder mystery? This sounds boring. Hey, let's do what we plan to do and take a really fun walk along the coast, talking about who knows what, because we're roommates, coworkers, and we're vacationing together," John Watson suggested, really trying to hard sell the R&R to help his detective friend recuperate. Sherlock, of course, ignored him. "How far in is the house?" Sherlock asked again. "About a mile inward," replied the vicar. "Good, we'll walk there," Sherlock said, looking directly at his friend. The vicar and Mr. Tregennis began to rise, but Sherlock stopped them. "But not before I talk to you, Mr. Tregennis," Sherlock said, standing quickly and taking a step forward. Tregennis sank back into his chair, nodding. He was pale and weary, but agreed to answer any questions Mr. Holmes might have. "Who let you out of the house last night?" Tregennis said he had let himself out, and that it didn't appear that anyone had come or gone since last night, and that it must be the work of some devil that could move through the walls. "Yeah, no, it wasn't," Sherlock stated abruptly, staring intently at the visitor. "An obvious question, but your siblings all live together, yet you lived a mile away. Why is that?" Tregennis explained that they were all retired. They had all co-owned a tin mining company that they sold. And now they simply hung out, played cards, and tried not to get caught up in murder mysteries. It wasn't going well, obviously. Sure, there had been some bad blood over the sale of the company, which led to a separate living situation, but that was just all water under the bridge. Sherlock narrowed his eyes and then hit the man with a barrage of questions. "Anything stand out yesterday?" "Nope. Everything seemed normal." "Yep." "Were they unnaturally nervous about anything?" "Nope." "Are you absolutely no help to me at all?" "Hey, no," Tregennis said. "I did notice something. While we were playing cards, I caught my brother looking out behind my shoulder. I was confused, so I checked to see if there was anything behind me. There wasn't, but I realized he was looking out the window. I looked, and through the window, I saw something move in the bushes outside. Super creepy. So, see? There's something." "So then you told them about the stranger lurking in the bushes outside, like any normal human being?" Sherlock asked, eyes still locked on Tregennis. "Well, no. I had some more to drink, and then I went home," Tregennis said. Sherlock continued to stare at Tregennis, watching his every move, until the awkward silence forced the visitor to continue. He went on to describe the encountered state of his siblings the next morning, Brenda dead, and the two brothers singing madly, and how one dead and two possibly insane people had shocked the doctor to his core, such that he had to sit down. According to the doctor, it looked like Brenda had been dead for over 6 hours. Sherlock held on to that statement, turning it over in his mind, before shooting abruptly from his chair to proclaim that they should really get walking. With that, Sherlock strode out through the door, and the others followed quickly behind. Roughly 20 minutes later, all could see the villa on the horizon. What would usually be a beautiful walk-up now had a sinister malaise, made all the more ominous by an approaching black carriage. The four men stepped aside and let the carriage pass, and what they saw was chilling. Behind the bars of the windows, it was dark inside, so dark that they could just make out the faces and wide, mad smiles of the two brothers grinning from the shadows. "Wait, were those your brothers?" Watson asked. Tregennis nodded and explained that they were being taken away to Helston, the mental hospital. The four continued on toward the villa, and within minutes, they arrived. "Wow, so there it is, huh?" Watson said, staring at the garden. That's where Mr. Tregennis saw the shadow of something that looked so evil that it blasted the sanity from the brothers and killed the sister instantly. Sherlock hesitated, staring at Watson in the stunning logic of the man of science. "Let's say maybe for that one," Sherlock said, before something caught his attention, and he was immediately lost in thought. He was so lost in thought that he knocked over a water bucket and accidentally spilled it on everyone's shoes, which Tregennis, after losing his sisters and his brothers losing themselves, now had wet shoes. Could this day get any worse? Brenda Tregennis had been a beautiful woman. At least, that's what the Victorian gentleman staring at her dead body thought important enough to be the first detail in describing her. They had just talked to the two family servants, an elderly woman and her young helper. They had heard nothing the night before, and the family had never been better off, or in better spirits. The elderly woman was the first to discover the scene and call for help, and the younger refused to stay another night in the house, and would be moving back in with her family in St. Ives. Next, they went to the scene of the crime, or whatever it was. The room where they had been playing cards the night before. The chairs were now pushed back against the wall, but otherwise, the place was exactly as it was found. Sherlock looked at the cards, strewn about the table, on the ashes in the fireplace, and into the garden beyond the window. Watson could see Sherlock's pursed lips and furrowed brow. "Why a fire?" Sherlock blurted out after a few minutes. "Pardon?" Tregennis asked. "Why a fire?" Sherlock asked again. "Do they usually light fires so late in the spring?" "Oh, I don't know," Tregennis replied. Last night was unseasonably cold and damp. The fire was lit right after I arrived." "I see," Sherlock said, and shrugged. "All right, Watson, let's get out of here and go smoke way too much tobacco in our tiny cottage." "What? That's it?" the vicar questioned. "Look, Vicar," Sherlock said, turning to face the man. "I understand it's the late 1800s, so you probably haven't seen the adaptations of these stories starring a negative 90-year-old Benedict Cumberbatch, but I can remember every detail of these crime scenes and walk through them in my mind over and over again. So don't worry about it. We'll figure this out." We cut to Sherlock and Watson sitting in their tiny cottage, shrouded in blue smoke. "Nope," Sherlock said. "Can't think in here. Let's go out and walk on the cliffs." Cut to Sherlock and Watson walking along the cliffs, looking for arrowheads, where they finally get around to the case at hand. "Okay, let's list what we know," Sherlock said. 1, it's not devils. It's never devils. That means 3 people have been grievously harmed by human agency. 2, the deaths occurred a few minutes after Tregennis left the room. He said it himself. The cards and everything were in the same place. Nothing had changed, and it was already well past when they would have gone to bed on a weeknight. It must have happened somewhere between when he left and 11 p.m., but not much later. 3, we know the movements of Tregennis after he left his house. Watson, I don't know if you know this, but I'm very smart. I knocked over that water by the house on purpose. I know you did, Watson said, picking an arrowhead out of some pebbles. Sherlock continued, as if he hadn't heard the doctor. I was able to spill some water on the dirt by his shoe and get a good idea of the print. When we were walking back, I could see his prints leading away, straight to his house. So, since Tregennis was not yet at the scene, and, according to point 1, devils weren't to blame, we need to figure out who the person was. It clearly wasn't the elderly servant, Mrs. Porter, because when in the history of the mystery genre has the help staff ever been the perpetrator? I also looked at the dirt outside the window, with 3-foot-high intact flowers, and no footsteps in the dirt. No one looked in that window to scare them all to death. That's what we know. But now we're at an impasse. So let's talk about literally everything else. And Sherlock did, talking about the Celts, arrowheads, and different shards of rocks. Watson was so distracted by Sherlock's seemingly inexhaustible trivia that he almost forgot about the case. That is, until they returned to their cottage, and the scary, bearded lion hunter waiting within. His name was Leon Sterndale, and he was every bit the surly 1800s British lion hunter and explorer. He sat, filling up the chair, beard resting on his barrel chest. His face was tan and deeply seamed. Watson made a point of describing how his beard was golden on the fringes and white near the lips, save a brown stain from the cigar he was perpetually smoking, which, gross. The man introduced himself as Dr. Leon Sterndale. Sherlock and Watson had heard of Dr. Sterndale among the villagers. Given his size and imposing demeanor, he made an impression. It was well known that he loved solitude, which is why he spent so much time far from anyone on the continent of Africa, camping with only his books in a lonely forest, which was also why Watson was so surprised to find him here, in their cottage. "The county police are idiots," Sterndale announced, "but I've heard of you. Maybe you can help. You see, I was a friend of the family. I was on the last ship out from England last night, headed to Africa when I received word. Left everything I had in the boat and made my way back here." Sherlock lit his pipe and sat back, leaving the room in a bit of an awkward silence before he said anything. "This whole event hasn't been in the papers yet, right?" "No. I received a telegram," Sterndale replied, sitting up in his chair. "Might I ask from whom?" Sherlock said. "Oh, asking follow-up questions to ascertain the background information to suspicious details. You are a detective," Sterndale said. "You may ask who sent the telegram, but that's my business." Sherlock stared him down with a look that said, "It's really not just your business." The famed adventurer lion hunter doctor broke the silence in a way that allowed him to keep his meticulously manicured aura of masculine bravado. "But I've no objection to telling you it was Roundhay, the vicar," he said, before pulling out another cigar and lighting it. "Now, seeing as you ask basic follow-up questions, you must be good. Tell me, do you have any idea who killed her and made the other two go crazy?" "Oh, yeah, I have no idea," Sherlock said. "I'm confident that I'll have some ideas pretty soon. That's usually how these things play out. But right now, nope, idea free." Waste of time, the adventurer doctor blurted out before springing to his feet and storming from the cottage, sprinkling ashes in his wake. Sherlock and Watson sat confused by all that, and Sherlock turned to his friend, telling Watson that he'd be right back. He wasn't, and it was over an hour before he returned, and as bad a mood as Sterndale had left. Well, Sterndale's clean, Sherlock concluded, crumpling a paper and tossing it into a corner. His story checks out. Turns out he did spend last night on the way to Africa. Looks like he isn't the guy who did whatever happened at the mansion last night. He's just a massive jerk. To lose all that luggage, Watson murmured to no one in particular. He is deeply interested in this case. Okay, seriously, the luggage thing is not an important detail. It's like you've learned nothing from me, Sherlock said, staring out the window. But you are right about something there. He is interested in this case. There might be something that I haven't investigated fully. We are devil-ridden. Our town is devil-ridden. The vicar sobbed into Sherlock's lapel the next morning. Watson had heard a carriage approach during his morning shave and watched as Sherlock went to greet the approaching vicar, the same man who had come with Draganus the other day. Seeing as conversations with good news generally don't begin with a stranger's spit and tears running down your coat, Sherlock broke free from the vicar's embrace and took a step back. Come on, how many times do we have to go over this? It's not devils, the detective said. What's going on? Mortimer Tregennis, the guy you talked to yesterday, the last surviving member of the Tregennis family, died last night, exactly how his sister had, the vicar said, and resumed his very one-sided hug with Sherlock. Can you fit us into your carriage? Sherlock asked abruptly. The vicar wiped his nose and nodded. Watson, Sherlock called over his shoulder. Breakfast has to wait. We have a date with a dead guy. Watson and Sherlock arrived before the doctor, or even the police, which, that response time. If you ever managed to time travel back to 1800s Britain, try not to need an emergency response team. Someone had cracked open a window, which made the room marginally better. It was stuffy, and made all the worse by the lamp still smoking on the table. Tregennis sat at the table, very much dead. His corpse was all contorted in the chair, stiffened, mid-turn, pointing at the window. Sherlock noted that he appeared to have gotten dressed in a hurry. The vicar pointed out that Tregennis's demise had come not last night, but early this morning. Sherlock's face lit up with an idea, and he rushed toward the front lawn, hurtled in through an open window, and then ran a lap around the room, downstairs, and back upstairs, before diving again through the window and landing face first on the lawn. Laughing hysterically, he wiped dirt from his face and looked up at the chimney. Within minutes, he was on the roof, balancing precariously, until he reached the chimney's opening. Sherlock scraped some ashes away and studied them in his palm, wavering ever so slightly on the roof's peak, before shoving them back in his pocket. Got it, Sherlock called to Watson and the vicar as the police and the doctor finally arrived like an hour after the man was discovered. Well, what happened? The vicar asked, still shaken by the mysterious death of his friend. I'm not going to say, Sherlock said. But the police are right here, the vicar pressed. You could end this whole thing right now. Ah, they're big kids. They can figure it out. They can always come to me and ask for the answer, but I'm feeling generous. I'll give them a hint. Look at the bedroom window and the sitting room lamp. So, just to get this clear, you know what's going on, but you're going to leave us all hanging for a teachable moment? The vicar sputtered in disbelief. Pretty much yes, Sherlock said. Alrighty. Well, if they want more information, like I said, I'll be back at my cottage. They shouldn't even need me, though. They can probably figure it out. Later that morning, after a healthy breakfast of blood sausage and smoking 3 bowls of pipe tobacco, Sherlock returned to the most recent crime scene. With a lamp, sitting and mulling over the case for the next 2 days, Sherlock periodically looked at the door, waiting for the knock of the local police to come ask for an explanation of the deaths. There's no way they could have figured it out on their own, right? Sherlock asked Watson. That would be really anticlimactic. Am I losing my touch? No, Watson replied. Watson himself didn't have any idea what the solution to the mystery could be, and he didn't see how the local police could have figured it out before him. Anyway, Watson, I'll clue you in, at least. Did you notice that there was a single common point of resemblance in all the different reports that reached us? Sherlock shared. That really seems like something I should have noticed after years of following you and meticulously cataloging our adventures, but no, I did not, Watson admitted. Sherlock continued as he was going to do anyway. It was the room. Well, the atmosphere of the room. You remember how the late Mortimer Tregennis remarked that the doctor collapsed into the chair when he first entered the room, where the brothers had gone mad and the sister was dead, and Mrs. Porter fainted upon entering the room and only barely made it to the window to air things out, and how we didn't faint when we entered Mortimer's room a couple days ago, but the window was already cracked? I checked, and the servant who discovered the body and opened the window also had to take the rest of the morning off because she was ill. In each case, there's evidence of a poisonous atmosphere. In every case, there was also combustion going on in the room. In one, a fireplace. In the other, a lamp. I've been sitting here to confirm it with the same version of the lamp. It was lit long after daylight. There was a connection between the air of the room and the madness or the deaths of these people. Now, since Mortimer Tregennis was holed up in his room, the vapors were more intense. So he was killed. And since some of the vapors were escaping out the chimney with the other Tregennis victims, and the room was much larger, it stands to reason that it would be weaker. Watson sat listening. So that would explain why the brothers were affected, but didn't die, he reflected. Good, you're following, Holmes said. Anyway, with this line of reasoning, I poked around Mortimer Tregennis' room and found, among the ashes, a brown powder. I took half of it and put it in an envelope. I wanted to leave some for the police to maybe catch up with me. Though, really, that's not going to happen. Clearing his throat, Sherlock continued. Now, I'm going to do an experiment. I have the powder in this envelope here, and I'm going to dump it on the lamp and sit here and see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to humor you, Watson said, and say that if you're right, and you usually are, then this should, at best, drive you insane. It's already killed 2 people and driven the other 2 into madness. You can't do this. Oh, what do you know? There's another chair I left on the other side of the table. It's okay to be scared to stay here with me, as I confirm how right I am, Sherlock said without looking up. Go ahead and leave if you want to. I might see you again. Watson rolled his eyes and took a seat. Sherlock knew he would stay. If he didn't, Sherlock might kill himself with this experiment. Watson realized just how terrible of an idea the whole thing was the moment Sherlock lit the stuff. Immediately, a puff of black smoke rose and filled the room. Watson squinted to see Sherlock through the haze, but soon, all he could see were terrifying figures swirling in the darkness. He tried to call out that they should really get out of there now, but his tongue was dry and useless. His eyes bulged and began to burn as though the skin was peeling off. He tried to scream, but couldn't take a deep enough breath. He began to panic. Squinting, he could make out Sherlock. Sherlock had lolled backwards, his face contorted in pain and terror, like Tregennis and his sisters had. It looked pale and deathly. They had really gone too far this time. Seeing his friend in the grip of death, Watson knew that he was their only hope for surviving this experiment gone awry. Using all of his strength, he hoisted himself to his feet. His joints were stiff, his knees barely able to bend, and so he could only stagger over to Sherlock. Holmes was paralyzed, but his eyes screamed out to Watson. The doctor wrapped his arms around Sherlock and made his way to the door. Luckily, it was a very small cottage, and after a few steps, and even though Watson fell, the pair finally crashed through the door and into the sunlight and fresh air. The black smoke billowed out from the doorway as the poison burned. Watson watched as the color began returning to Sherlock's face, and soon the detective groaned. Hey, thanks, Watson. So maybe that wasn't my best decision. We should have cracked a window or something, or one of us should have sat outside. I am very sorry that I almost killed us both with my stupid experiment. I just thought... Watson, are you crying? Sherlock asked. I mean, it's just... Sorry. And thank you. Those are the nicest things you've ever said to me, Sherlock, Watson said. Holmes immediately lapsed into a joke, something about them not needing the poison gas to drive them mad, because clearly they were mad enough to have tried it, which, too soon. On the positive side, neither of them had any doubt about the way the murders had been carried out. They sat down on the lawn and waited for the poison and the lantern to burn out. Back to what we know, Sherlock blurted out. I think we can wrap up the murder of Tregennis' sister, right, Brenda? It was totally Mortimer Tregennis, the guy who died a couple days ago. I mean, there was an issue with the inheritance, he lived apart from the rest of the family, and he himself talked about bad blood. All he had to do was dump a handful of that stuff in the fire as he left, and as we could see, it would do the job. Seeing as he had motive, means, opportunity, and that no one else had entered the house after he left, well, it really looks like he did it. He even mentioned someone in the bushes to really clumsily try to throw us off his trail. Watson started, so maybe his death was suicide, and we can get back to not working on vacation. No? Dumb idea? Dumb idea. It's not that dumb, Sherlock said. I mean, we don't know what was going on in the mind of Mortimer Tregennis this morning. He could have been so racked with guilt that he couldn't handle it. Fortunately, there is one person left in this world who has some insight into how that family worked. And here he is, Sherlock said, motioning to the sentient wall of cigar smoke and colonialism that walked up the path. It was Sterndale, the lion hunter explorer doctor who had been just so pleasant the other day. You sent for me, Mr. Holmes? Well, here I am. Though I don't know why I should obey your summons, the chronically humor-deficient explorer remarked. No, yeah, I get it. You're an independent guy who plays by your own rules. You don't have to obey anything. I see. Anyway, have a seat on the ground with us, said Sherlock, patting the grass beside him. We would invite you in, but our cottage is filled with poison. Sterndale rolled his eyes. Why would he sit on the ground with some detective and his doctor friend, who wasn't even the lion-hunting kind of doctor friend? Well, it's about you. Actually, maybe we should go somewhere more private, Sherlock corrected, waiting for it. We just met the other day. What private matter could you have to discuss with me? The lion hunter replied, setting himself up perfectly for the spike. Oh, just the killing of Mortimer Tregennis, Sherlock said with an impish grin. Sherlock gritted his teeth and clenched his fists. The veins in his forehead popped out and shook with rage. He took one step toward the seated Sherlock, sitting there on the grass and grinning, before he stopped, took a breath, and calmed down. I've lived so long with the savages beyond the law that I've become used to being the law myself. You would do well, Mr. Holmes, not to forget it. I wouldn't want to hurt you, Sterndale spat before taking a puff of his cigar. Wow, you managed to be pretty racist and self-incriminating at the same time. Anyway, I don't want to hurt you either, Mr. Sterndale. I mean, I sent for you and not the police. Sterndale grimaced, but took a seat on the ground. Good. Now my next step will depend entirely on the nature of your defense. Defense? Sterndale asked, taking a handkerchief to mop the sweat from his brow. You're bluffing. No, you see, it was you who was bluffing to us, Sherlock insisted. Here, let me explain. You were so eager to come back that you left a good amount of property on the ship, still heading to Africa. I didn't buy your reasons for coming back, so I followed you. Followed me? Yep. I didn't see anyone following me, Sterndale said, narrowing his eyes. Yeah, in addition to my brilliance, I'm also ridiculously sneaky. Anyway, I followed you. Like, a lot. It was mostly boring stuff, trying to figure out who was the suspect and all that from the vicar and people in town, but you couldn't learn anything new. So you went home and spent a long night deciding what to do, and then you did it. You were wearing those exact shoes, and before you left, you put a handful of red gravel in your pocket. Sterndale gasped, but Sherlock continued. When you got to the house, it was early, way before anyone woke up, but you knew Tregennis was an early riser. Like you said, you were a friend of the family. You threw some pebbles at the window to tap on the glass, and Tregennis heard it. Only it was early even for him, so he dressed hastily and rushed downstairs, not waking any of the servants. There, in the sitting room, you talked for a short bit, but then you left. Only you didn't leave. You stood outside the window and watched what occurred. We both know what you did, but your why will determine how I proceed. Wait, Watson interrupted. So you know he did it. You know it, but you still invited this very large man who hunts lions and has already voiced his enthusiasm for taking the law into his own hands to our remote cottage to voice your well-substantiated claims that he murdered a man. And now you're putting the ball in his court? Watson, really? I make poor decisions when it comes to satiating my intense curiosity. We just almost poisoned ourselves. Really, try to keep up. Sherlock said, before turning back to Sterndale, who was pulling something from his pocket. It was a photograph. Brenda Tregennis, Sherlock said, studying the face. He looked up and saw tears streaming down Sterndale's face. I loved her. For years. She loved me too. We couldn't marry, though. My wife left me years ago, and because of the laws of England, I couldn't divorce her. We tried to find another way around, but for years I waited, and for years Brenda waited. Then he broke out into such deep sobs that they had to wait until he could talk again. The vicar knew, Sterndale continued. He was in her confidence. I was close to finding her, my wife, to finally getting that divorce when I received the vicar's telegram that night. Of course I would leave all my bags on that ship when such a fate came for the woman I love. So, there it is. There is the missing clue to my actions. And here's another one. You there. Watson, was it? You're a doctor. Have you ever heard of the Devil's Foot root? Watson shook his head. Sterndale shared that no one from Europe had. He had probably the only specimen on the continent, and it was from Africa. Sterndale explained that he kept a small lab in his cottage. He was, after all, a lion hunter-explorer doctor, and not just a lion hunter-explorer. Well, he had been on friendly terms with the Tregennis family, on account of Brenda, and he did learn of the controversy surrounding the inheritance. But, like everyone else, he had thought it was all settled. That had been a couple of years ago. Still, something always rubbed him the wrong way about that Mortimer Tregennis, especially after a notable conversation they'd shared one day in his lab. Look, if you're curious about stuff, just spit it out, Sterndale said, growing more frustrated by the minute. Damn it, man, I'm a lion hunter-explorer doctor, not a lion hunter-explorer mind reader. Mortimer stood there bug-eyed. Well, I am really curious to learn about, I don't know, poisons? Sterndale was happy to share his knowledge and also to get Mortimer Tregennis to stop loitering around his lab. So he showed Mortimer the Devil's Foot root, one that produced a toxic smoke that, if inhaled, would lead to madness or death, and would be nearly undetectable by European medicine. Now, if you don't mind, will you please put that sample away unsupervised while I fiddle around with something in the cabinets for a few minutes? Sterndale was no freelance detective, but he had a pretty good idea of how Mortimer had got his hands on the Devil's Foot root. The vicar's telegram reached Sterndale at the last possible minute, at the last port in England, the minute the ship was setting sail for Africa. Mortimer, of course, didn't know Sterndale and Brenda had been in love, and definitely didn't know the vicar was in Sterndale's confidence. Mortimer had figured out that Sterndale would be the only one to know the effect of the Devil's Foot root, and it would be months or years before the explorer returned to England, and if it hadn't been for that meddling vicar and his telegram, Tregennis would have gotten away with it. He would have been the sole heir to the entire family fortune. But he didn't get away with it, and Sterndale had returned. But what could Sterndale do? It was his word, a surly adventurer who was never around, versus the local, well-connected rich guy. Sterndale knew Mortimer had murdered his sister and driven his brothers insane, but there was no way he could ever prove it to his countrymen. Still, he had loved Brenda, and he resolved that the woman he loved would be avenged. And so you found your way into the house under contrived pretenses, had a pleasant but false conversation, hid the powder from the Devil's Foot root in the lamp, and left. Got it, Sherlock said. Oh, no, Sterndale corrected. You see, he had just killed the woman I loved. She was my everything. So I wanted to see the look on his face when he knew it was me, and that I knew what he did. I wanted to watch him sink into his chair when I pulled out my revolver and the remaining powder, and I told him that he could either sit in his drawing room and die, or leave the house and be shot. I wanted to hear his panicked breathing as, gun trained on him, I emptied the powder in the fire and left. I knew it wouldn't bring Brenda back or heal or do anything of the sort, but justice was all I had left. And as I watched the life fade from his eyes, his face contorted in pain, I knew that it had been done. Sherlock and Watson sat wide-eyed and in silence at Sterndale's complete lack of remorse for the murder. So, I did it, Sterndale continued. You can tell the police if you want. I won't resist. I have nothing now, except my money, a medical degree, and a world-renowned reputation. I will either die here by the will of the crown, or I'll return to Africa and stay there until I die." Sherlock grimaced and looked to the ground. "I won't stop you from leaving," he said, looking up at Sterndale, "and I'm sorry for your loss." Sterndale nodded, rose, and bowed to Sherlock and Watson. He walked down the path, and the next morning, he would board a ship for Africa and never be seen in England again. After he'd left, Sherlock exhaled, reaching for his tobacco pouch to take the edge off that intense conversation. The smoke still hadn't cleared out of the cottage. Sherlock looked over at Watson. Since the police hadn't bothered to talk to him about the case, and they had been investigating independently, there was no need to change that now. Sherlock reflected on how he'd never loved before, though if he had, he imagined he might act the same way as Sterndale. Snapping out of it, he faced Watson. No, he wouldn't insult his doctor friend's intelligence by explaining the key to cracking the case. Okay, fine, he'd share it. It was the red gravel. It was different from all the other dirt in the garden, and he'd recognized it from his time following Sterndale the previous day. That, the powder at both locations, and the lamp burning in daylight helped him finally see the truth. Anyway, what could be more relaxing on a Saturday morning than inhaling some poison and then watching a murderer ride off into the distance? Sherlock asked his friend and chuckled. You're right. I do need to relax. Let's go take that walk. As they stood to leave, Watson paused. You know, and you're going to say it's not? But it was totally Devil's. I wanted to start in the middle with Sherlock Holmes, on an adventure that was out of London, out of Baker Street, and one that hasn't been adapted to death. In his lifetime, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, ranked his favorite Sherlock Holmes stories, and this one was among them. And yes, we will absolutely do more Sherlock Holmes stories in time, covering all the major ones. They're a lot of fun. And now, it's time for the best of the worst. The villain this time is the Hypno Hustler. He's a Spider-Man villain, and he hustles people with hypnosis. And that's not even some secret name he has. It's his stage name, because yes, he's a disco singer. It's from 1970's Spider-Man, so this was culturally relevant and not super cheesy. Well, it was probably less super cheesy. The issue's titled Spider-Man Night Fever, though, which I don't think will ever be okay. The Hypno Hustler wears a hypnotizing armored suit, and he has 3 backup singers, called the Mercy Killers, and they get up on stage each night at various disco clubs. And then he puts the audience in a trance, using his hypno headset, which I guess he developed? All this to make everyone empty their pockets for him. My one gripe is this. The armored suit that bends anyone to your will is cool and all, but how did the Hypno Hustler get wireless headphones in 1975? Forget scamming club owners and petty crime, patent that technology and never have to work again. But the money was always a means to an end for the Hypno Hustler. He used the hypno technology and wireless headphones to hypnotize club owners into giving him all their money and robbing audiences for the music. He loved disco so much and just wanted to become a famous disco recording artist. A dream that probably shouldn't tell him, but really had an expiration date. Well, and I know this is common knowledge, so I really don't need to point it out, spiders are naturally resistant to hypnosis. Peter Parker, well, Spider-Man, spoiler I guess, is out at the club in a love triangle when he should be studying, and Aunt May is in the hospital, and a truck of nuclear weapons was just hijacked, because who needs one plot when you can have 8? And Peter Parker resists the Hypno Hustler long enough to give himself some webbing earplugs. And while everyone else is giving up their possessions to the on-the-nose beat of a song titled Sweet Surrender, Hypno Hustler's wireless headphones end up being his own downfall. Spider-Man realizes that they selectively filter out the Hypno Hustler's own music, and nothing else, which is also probably another missed patent opportunity. Anyway, he succumbs to his own trance, and the fight ends, allowing Spider-Man to string him from the ceiling and change back into Peter Parker, before Mary Jane and Parker's actual date realize what happened. So yeah, if you're out at the club, and you wake up the next day without your money and not really remembering what happened, just blame it on the Hypno Hustler. Thank you so much for listening today. If you like this episode, a review on Apple Podcasts is extremely helpful. You can find the show there at apple.fictional.fm. Today's episode was adapted by me, Jason Weiser, from the short story The Adventure of the Devil's Foot by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Today's episode was edited and produced by Carissa Weiser. Our theme song is by the amazing Breakmaster Cylinder. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.